Hello everyone, and welcome back to this tutorial series on the Age of Empires 4 content editor. In this episode, we're going to look at entities and transformation to fine-tune our map. When creating our rough layout in the terrain layout tool, we had some control over the types of areas in our map, as well as the player's spawn area. When we look at our generated map though, we can see it also generated resources like stone and gold and has spawned holy sites and trade posts. All those interactive objects in the game are referred to as entities. Let's have a look at how we add, remove or change those entities in the editor. We'll pan the camera through our map in the render view, hover over one of the holy sites with our mouse and notice a red bounding box appear around it. When we left click on the holy site, it becomes selected, making a little grid and some arrows appear. When we pay attention to the scenario tree, which is the window to the left of our render view, we can see that the holy site is selected here. The scenario tree shows everything that is currently in our level, like holy sites and resources, but also anything from smoke effects to stone debris. We can double click on any of the objects to have our render view camera jump to its position. This makes it a lot easier to find specific objects in our level, rather than flying through our map manually and hoping we don't miss anything. In this small map, we might not want to have 3 holy sites. So let's right click on one of them in our scenario tree and press remove to delete this entity from our level. Alternatively, you can simply press the delete key on your keyboard when an entity is selected. Now let's have a look at the placement of the generated trade posts. I think I'd like to move one of them more into the corner a bit further away from the player spawns. When we have the trade post selected, we can click, hold and drag one of the 3 arrow widgets to move it along the selected axis. When we release the mouse, the trade post will jump to the new position. Instead of dragging the arrows, we can also drag the colored planes in between 2 arrows to move it along both axes at once. When we're happy with the placement of our trade posts, let's have a look at some of the resources on the map. We can select and move around our gold deposits, stone deposits, berry bushes, individual trees, and even all animals like deer and sheep in the same way that we did with our trade posts. When we move something around like stone or gold deposits, we can see that when the terrain goes up or down, the entity might end up floating in the sky or even get stuck underground. With the stone deposit selected, let's look at the window in the top right, which is called the Properties window. The Properties window displays all information related to the selected asset, which allows us to make a bunch of changes. Right now, we want to click the Height Lock drop-down window and select Terrain. When we move our entity, we can see that it will always snap to the height of the terrain, avoiding weird floating objects or stuff clipping through the ground. When we're trying to move entities like berry bushes or herds of deer, it can be incredibly tedious to move them one by one. Let me quickly press Ctrl Z to undo this mess and move them back into their previous position. What we can do instead is select the first berry bush and then hold down Shift to select everything else we want to move at once. Before moving them, I'll quickly turn on the height lock, and now it's a lot easier to drag them anywhere I want. So far, we have only been moving our entities around the map, but we can also rotate and scale them. With our berry bushes still selected, let's have a look at the window towards the bottom right, which is called the Transformation window. Right now, the first option is selected, which is our Translate tool that allows us to move entities around. Let's select the second one, which is the Rotate tool. This allows us to drag the spherical lines around any entity to rotate them. The third one is the Rescale tool, which allows us to make entities larger or smaller. This is something we want to be careful with, as any asset that facilitates unit interaction might become janky very quickly, so I recommend not rescaling anything for the moment. For future reference, the hotkeys for those are W for Translate, E for Rotate, and R for Rescale. I recommend getting familiar with these, as you will be using them a lot. When moving around and placing our resources, it's also useful to note that we can copy and paste selected entities by pressing Ctrl C and then Ctrl V. Note that our properties like Height Lock are also duplicated to the new entity. But when we want to place entirely new entities or other assets in our map, we have to navigate to the object browser, which is the bottom window by default. Let's navigate to the eBPS folder, which contains all our entity blueprints. We can select Gameplay, Resources, and Food. Let's drag some shoreline fish from the object browser into our render window. The fish have now been added to our map and will therefore also show up in the scenario tree on the left. By default, our shoreline fish seem to snap to the terrain, leaving them quite far below the water's surface. Let's go to the Properties panel and change their height lock to Surface so they align properly with the water of our lake. Let's move over to the Trees folder in our object browser and find one that we like. When we want to place more objects quickly instead of dragging them in from the object browser one by one, we can instead select them in the object browser and right-click in our render window. We should now be able to place and manipulate entities in our map. So spend as much time as you want fine-tuning and playtesting your map until you end up with something you're happy with. In the next episode, we'll have a look at making finer changes to our map's terrain. I'd like to give a special thanks to Dale Rogers and Angelo Pinho dos Santos. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next episode.